Henry Blodget, by the way, I didn't even introduce Henry Blodget, the creator, founder, boss at Business Insider, also here. How do you get around the job losses as a direct reflection of a credit scam? That the banks are running a scam. It's basically a wealth transfer. That the economic growth is the growth at the expense of you. I can either serve you a sandwich and you can give me money, or I can hit you over the head with a baseball bat and take your money, and that this is the collective baseball bat from one portion of society to another portion of society being facilitated by the government.
Well, the way we have executed this turnaround that Dan's talked about is by inflating that sector that in large part, not completely, but in large part got us into it, which again strikes a lot of people, exactly, which strikes a lot of people as grossly unfair. And to Dan's point, relative to a year ago, we are in great shape. Relative to 2 or 3 years ago, where we are now would have been inconceivable. 10% unemployment, house prices down almost 30%. Massive entitlements, huge deficit, ballooning borrowing. We're in a horrific situation relative to where we were 2 or 3 years ago, and again, this seemed inconceivable.
Which brings me to, I don't think there's that much debate about the fact that we have more economic growth, that the credit markets are there. I wouldn't debate that. It's apparent. What for me is, how are we achieving that, and are we doing that at the expense of our society as opposed to through creating value in our society? How do you look at that?
I think throwing the money at the financial sector was one of the components of this bridge to get over that chasm we created by that sharp downturn. The question is,
the unemployment. Can I just look at this? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to explain this because I've put this up a few times. This is the current unemployment in the recession. It's the most we've seen ever. These are all past recessions. I look at this, I look at the housing, and for me, I'm like, we've got a structural problem, which is that we're taking out this partially because China is exporting their unemployment to us through currency rigging, and partially because we've got special interests in our own country that are at the government game rigging. So I've got game rigging in the U.S., whether it's by banks or others, pharmaceutical companies, pick them, right, who are just, I don't want to compete on a flat field. And then I've got China doing the same thing, and the weakest in our society pay the price, and the rest of us kind of swim around in the middle. How do you look at this?
One of the answers to this is, two words we don't hear much, which is industrial policy. And in this decade,
the red line decade,
our industrial policy was basically support Wall Street and housing.
Right.
Between 2001 and 2005, something like 45% of private sector jobs were tied to housing and housing-related finance. And it was the best place to have a bubble because all those jobs were domestic, from the insurer down to the mortgage broker, the landscaper, you name it. Those are all those jobs that went away.
This is the China jobs.
And they were supported by subsidies. What we are now putting in place since the stimulus, I would argue, is a new set of industrial policies on a smaller scale. And we're talking about making the energy grid smarter, digitizing health information, healthcare reform, alternative energy, turning the U.S. auto industry into an electric auto industry, which not only has the capability to create jobs at those companies, but to create a new kind of commercial infrastructure that then invites other jobs, a la the internet.
So my question for both of you, because I think all three of us would agree that's where we would like to be headed. Hopefully that's where we are headed. That's where the jobs will be. Can we get what Dan is describing if we don't resurrect rules for capitalism so that lending, on the lending side, on the money side, must be injected into the economy to facilitate his cars and his power generation transitions, et cetera? Because right now the way you make money is by inflating the bubble, taking the money as the bubble goes up, let it pop and run. And that's not going to create what we need, and that's what the government has created for the banks right now. How do we fix that?
That's right. They're likely to continue creating it for a while because they're so scared of repeating the mistake that was made in 1937, where they tightened too fast, brought the economy down again. So you're going to see that, but we may escape for a while without radical financial reform. But it's, again, we haven't done anything to head off what got us.
So how do you answer that? If we haven't restored the system that forces investors and lenders to make money by lending and investing as opposed to speculating and or just gaming, how do you get the outcomes that you would see?
I take as, banks, you can't live with them, you can't shoot them.
Right.
At least in this country.
But you can prevent them from gambling with other people's money.
Yes. I think the problem we have had in this country the last 30 years is that Wall Street basically gets the regulation it wants, regardless of who is in charge. Every partisan combination. And if there's a rule, they get it changed through lobbying. I take that as sort of the baseline scenario going forward, that we are not going to get a satisfying sort of harsh regime.
Where you get
that they
injection of
need and that
capitalism,
they
the
ask for.
resurrection of investment and all that.
We are not going to get this. I mean, the things are relatively simple: higher capital levels,
Transparency.
personal liability
It's just
for
easy.
directors. I mean,
Right.
it's not rocket science.
I know.
The reason we're not getting it is because we still have this dysfunctional relationship
Right.
between Wall Street and Washington.
So then, I got to wrap. How do you get to your conclusions, as optimistic as they are, with the assumption that we can't get personal liability, transparency, and capital requirements?
It's going to be other stuff other than
can
banking and
overcome it.
finance that gets us out.
You agree?
Yes, but it's going to be slow. It's going to take a long time.
Because the banking
Euphoria
is a
right now.
drag.
And because we have 10% unemployment, and we have to transition to these new industries.
down to
It's going to take a
9.7.
long time.
Well, it's actually 17.5. See how it's fun with numbers? 10, 9, 17, whatever you want. Anyway, nice to see you guys. Thank you for the
Great to see you.
Good being
conversation.
here.
Check out Dan's article. Check out Henry's media property, the Business Insider.